So, this is going to be short, more or less, and full of value. If not otherwise specified, I'm going to talk about tier 4 specifically, as that is going to be what we're going into. No talent builds or similar, because they are just one Google search away. This is for general knowledge, mostly focused on PvE. I repeat, this won't be 3-minute guides on how to play your class. This is general knowledge that helps you make decisions by yourself. Don't blindly do stuff and have no idea why you do it. Use your brain. This is like an in buff for TBC Classic. Alright? So, let's get into it. We're going to start with the classes. First, the Druid. Balance is still one of the bottom specs all around, but now you can summon trees and you bring a hit buff on top of Moonkin Aura and Insect Swarm. So you're actually welcome in raids, at least one of you, probably. Feral. You actually get a useful spell in Mangle. The spec get also cleaned up a lot, and once you comfortably reach crit immunity with defense and or resilience, you become an okay tank early. Your biggest strength, you can either be a tank or a DPS with the switch of your gear, and therefore the single most flexible spec in the game. Pretty much the ideal second tank for 10 mans, and because you have no block mechanic to eat crushings, you are naturally a beefy boy. Sunwell has no crushing blows, so you become super beefy boy. Cat is okay. You can easily bring 2 ferals together with a paladin and a warrior to be the tanking team if required. Restoration. Not much change, to be honest. You can now become a tree and hot stack. That's the biggest change for you. You're not a top healer, but you're still a healer. You'll get your spots. Key items for druids are tailoring epics for boomkins and trees. Especially for trees. Boomkins are kind of similar to elemental shamans, where they do not have specific crafting tailoring items for nature arcane damage. So it's spell strike mostly. For ferals, it's tier 4, where the 2-set bonus is incredibly good and going to stay with you until 4-piece tier 6. Then there's Earth Warden from Cenarian Expedition, which is pretty much the best tanking weapon in early you can get. And maybe the Wolf's Head Helm might still be relevant. Depends, I'm not an expert for ferals. In PvP, Druids, well, let's be honest, are probably one of the most single broken pieces of game design that was ever in the game at that point. All the other classes had to catch up over multiple expansions. You're effectively slow immune, you can heal while you're moving, you have one of the best CCs in the game in Cyclone, on top of Feral Charge, Bash and Roots. Druid is so good you can even go quite deep into balance and pick up Dream State to deal more damage, because why the fuck not? Or if you flip the script, you can be deep balance and throw some hots. Feral isn't bad, either paired with a rogue or maybe a mage, maybe a priest. Not free gladiator like the hottie kind of druids, but it's playable. Professions, kind of similar to key items here. If you're a tree, probably tailoring. If you're a boomy, maybe tailoring. You can also pick up spell strike from the auction house, I guess. And if you're a feral, it should be leatherworking, I guess. Drums and cleft hoof set, maybe, stuff like that. The Hunter. Beast Mastery. Welcome to TBC. You are now a good class. Really good. Pretty much the king of single target DPS, in fact. And you do that with one button. If for some reason that won't be in TBC Classic, it's not that complicated anyway. You press steady shot between autos and use kill command on cooldown. You still bring also a 3% flat damage buff for your group. You have practically limitless mana with the vibe aspect that has no penalty. And of course you have feign death. There's going to be many spots for you, but also there are going to be many hunters probably. Marksmanship is now pretty much the PvP spec, because it gets silencing shot, you have scatter shot, aim shot is in that tree. Yeah. Not much to say there. Otherwise, honestly, survival. One survival hunter in a raid can be beneficial because of exposed armor. You shouldn't have more than one in that case. It also has Wyvern Sting for PvP, so if you're going to play PvP as a hunter, you're going to have to decide between silencing shot and Wyvern Sting pretty much. Key items for hunters is whatever the D3 set, because it has a set bonus that gives you 600 armor penetration on every time you use kill command. So that shit is fucking broken. Get that. you're going to wear it till tier 5. PvP, hunters are good. You're going to have, like I mentioned, to choose between silencing shot and wyvern sting. You're going to spam viper sting on everybody that has mana inside your range. And you now have a mortal strike effect on aim shot. You, as mentioned for PvE as well, have a limitless supply of mana pretty much by the aspect of the viper. It's a good spec, a good class. 2s and 3s will be your main focus. You can definitely become a gladiator as a hunter. Professions, become leather worker, press drums, be even better in PvE. Pick up whatever you like as the second professions. Mages. Honestly, not much changed for mages. Water Elemental and Icy Veins are pretty much the biggest new things they have. Maybe Arcane Blast and Arcane, obviously. But Frost is good early. Fire is the go-to bread and butter spec. Arcane with Arcane Blast can be really good, especially if we are getting a TBC that has short boss fights like Classic has right now, because Arcane famously has issues with its mana. Tier 5 has a good set bonus which gets Arcane Mages up to really competitive damage, nearly catching up to Hunters and Warlocks, maybe even doing more. But raid spots for Mages will be limited. You're still great for 5-mans because you bring water and good crowd control, but in raids, let's be honest, Warlocks and Mage are just going to do a better job than you. Key items. Tailoring. Go farm primals. You should get all the tailoring items you can get. Spell strike set, the frozen stuff if you're going to be frost, or the fire shit if you're going to be fire. I don't think there's an arcane set, as I mentioned, with the Moonkins. But tailoring, really good. PvP, mages did not lose anything of their PvP power. You're part of RMP, one of the most dominant comps there ever was in 3s. Pretty much channel your inner Draenei, and you can easily become a gladiator if you put your mind to it. Professions, tailoring. Obviously. Not really. Go farm primals. The Paladin. For Holy, not much changed. It is pretty much the same spec it was before. You have Holy Light, Flash of Light, and Holy Shock. You got a little bit of new stuff that helps you use those spells, but the gameplay is pretty much the same. Protection is now a real spec. You have a Taunt, you have Avenger's Shield, you get Spiritual Attunement, which obviously all the specs get, that returns mana to you if you get healed. And you are the king of AoE tanking. Not bad on single target either. You're a 5-man god, you're a Hygel god, and without full tier 6 gear you will actually probably have to try not to tank the whole waves or you're going to die. You, later in the game, outscale Prot Warriors. It's going to be my personal main, probably. Retribution. Red boys, you're not a meme anymore. You're quite similar to balanced druids, as you're still pretty much at the bottom of the spec hierarchy. But you can make up for that by your support. You refresh all the judgments, ideally the heal from the heal paladins, mana from the protection paladins, and crusader judgment from yourself. You bring a 3% crit debuff, and you bring Sanctity Aura, which increases the damage done by all affected by 3% as well, on top of the holy increase, which prot paladins like myself will love you for. I pretty much want a pocket red at all times if possible. And yes, Blood Elves are inherently slightly superior to Alliance Retribution Paladins, if there's not going to be any balancing there. Because Seal of Blood deals around 10% more damage than Command, and also indirectly earns you more mana by damaging yourself, and therefore, through Spiritual Attunement, giving you more mana back. Key items for Paladins. If you're going to be Retribution, it's going to be two-hand weapons, obviously. If you are a tank, it's going to be the bracers from blacksmithing, tank bracers. Because there are no good tank bracers in tier 4. These bracers are pretty much a must-have. The green tower bracers, I think are they called. pretty much are going to be must-have for all the protection warriors and paladins in tier 4. There's also a holy damage cloak from the trash in Karazhan, which is really good for threat. You should pick that up if you're protection. In PvP, outside of Bubble, which priests can even dispel now, there's nothing a druid can't do better than you as a healer, and outside of Repentance, there's nothing a warrior can't do way better than you as a red. It's going to be pretty tough times compared to those classes. Your best bet are 5s because you have Bubble, and in that case nobody else has that. Also, priests aren't that common in 5s, I guess, because they're so squishy compared to you. But you could, I guess, also play Retribution in like 3s together with a warrior and a shaman who places Will Fury for both of you. I guess that could work, where you just both bonk with Stun Herald. Overall, you can reach heights, but it's going to be way harder than other classes, like druids and warriors are going to roll. Professions. If you're a Retribution, go blacksmithing and craft yourself a 2-hand weapon. All the 2-hand weapons in tier 4 are pretty shitty, except maybe Go Hole. There's even the only 2-hand sword in tier 4, which is called Despair, which should tell you everything about the state of 2-hand weapons. Just craft yourself one. Be happy. Keep it till tier 6. Easy life. If you're holy, you can even go tailoring for the Primal Moonclaw set, but it's whatever. Retribution, blacksmithing, all the other specs. What you like. Priests. Disc is pretty much the PvP spec, or the spec that buffs spirit. You shouldn't have more than one spirit buffer in the raid being disc. Also because holy is insane. Circle of Healing is pretty much the best healing spell in TBC. It heals 5 people, a whole group. Holy is the best healing spec in TBC in my opinion. Shadow. This is where a lot changed. You are now giving your party 5% of the shadow damage you deal back as mana. Boom. Every raid should have at least one shadow. You also give some debuffs on top of that. You increase the spell damage taken by the mobs by 5%. You increase the shadow damage taken by the mob by 10%. Warlocks are good. They're going to love you. Depending on how TBC turns out, like I already mentioned, long fights are your problem. You are still having mana problems even when giving everyone else mana. You're giving them what you self can't have. So if there's short fights, you are going to have a lot more of a position inside the raids. In tier 4 you're even pretty decent DPS, which also comes from the already multiple timely mentioned tailoring items, which are really good for you. You just scale like ass. You don't get used to being on top of recount. You get used to scrolling down. Key items. Tailoring. Everyone. Holies get the healing shit. Shadows get spell strike, get the shadow set. The shadow set especially is really good for you. It only has shadow damage, I think, but you don't need crit or stuff. You are a shadow priest. You dot. PvP. Same cases as the mages. Play RMP. Get gladiator if you're good. You can also play rogue priest, mage priest, stuff in 2s. You won't have a problem. Professions. I don't think there's anything more I have to say to that. We come to the invisible cunts. Rogues have new stuff, which will be pretty much irrelevant for PvE. Mutilate is a cool new spell, but outside of very rare cases in which you have 2 daggers that far outclass your other weapons, you shouldn't go dagger pretty much. And especially not mutilate. Your PvE life will be combat. Assassination Tree has exposed armor, which could be the reason you are going to get into a raid, because exposed armor is pretty good. It has one problem though. Of course, depending on how it's going to be implemented, exposed armor can override thunder armor. So if you have a warrior tank and use exposed armor, you are reducing the threat of your warrior tank. So if you don't have a warrior tank, great. Then you're a rogue that has actually a use in the side raid outside of hitting the boss. But if you have a warrior tank, it could become complicated. Going to depend on your setup and how it finally gets implemented in TBC Classic, as mentioned. Combat, nothing really changed there. You hit stuff, you deal damage, you do consistent damage. That's the thing, why combat is the best PvE spec. Subtlety begot stuff like Cheat Death, Shadow Step, which are fun things you maybe could use in PvP. I'm not an expert there on rogues, but for PvE they're pretty irrelevant. Your main focus in PvE should be trying to be useful. Do not die. TBC is a bitch to melee, and you probably are not going to be on top of the damage meters earlier on. So try to earn your spot otherwise. Key items. The Wastewalker set could be an option for you. It's a not class-bound set from the dungeons, which has a hit bonus, which makes it good. And there's also leatherworking epics you can craft yourself. I would recommend going combat swords and focusing on that. Because if everybody does what they're supposed to do, you should be the only one who really goes for swords. So then you pick those up, get some hit, do decent damage. PvP, as mentioned with the priests and mages, RMP is your bread and butter. Otherwise than that, watch World of Warcraft again. Your ceiling is pretty much only limited by your own skill and the skill of your teammates. You can do anything you want as long as you can back it up. Professions, you could go blacksmithing and craft yourself the one-hand maces. For PvE, if you for some reason don't like swords, or if you are going to use them for PvP anyway, or whatever the reason might be. Otherwise, leatherworking is great for drums and the epics. Or you could take whatever. Nothing really, really outstanding outside of, obviously, drums. The Shaman. Elemental may be the least changed spec overall from a gameplay standpoint. It's still Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning. It just got key improvements where it needed it. It got mana regeneration through Water Shield and Talents. It got Lightning Overload, which, well, pretty much just increases your damage. It got new totems in Totem of Wrath. It was improved upon, not really extended. Should always have one. Enhancement was the spec that got all the changes that Elemental didn't, probably. You can now dual wield. You bring an AP buff. You bring totems. You always did. You can reduce your incoming damage that also regenerates your mana with Shamanistic Rage. Your damage isn't even terrible. Enhancement basically went from meme to competitive melee DPS. You annoyingly have to place Windfury Totem for the other pleb melee, so they don't suck as much. But if you twist it with agility, you're already a solid raid bomber. It is in the same boat as the other melees, though. You should try not to die. And maybe don't consume your Stormstrike debuff yourself if you have elementals or boomkins in your raid. Their 20% increase is going to be more than yours. Be a brother, cast Flame Shock. Even save mana, but with that. Restoration. Restoration was changed with quite a lot of finesse, to be honest. If there was no Circle of Healing on priests, they might be my #1 healer. They bring totems. They got their single target heal improved with Earth Shield. Chain Heal was already great and was improved further. They also got Bloodlust. Obviously all the specs got Bloodlust, or Heroism if you're Alliance. Shamans are the only class that bring Bloodlust to the raid. TBC has Bloodlust that does not give you a debuff, and therefore, in theory, you can rotate Shamans into your Warlock Hunter groups and have them, well, be hasted all the time. You can stack Shamans, it's completely okay. You can easily go with one Shaman per group if you have that many. Everybody likes them. They bring fun to all the other classes, with Windfury, Wrath, all the good stuff. Key items. If you're elemental, you want the lightning capacitor from Karazhan. That's pretty much the elemental item. If you're enhancement, you want the blacksmithing maces. They are really good for you. Especially because they have the same speeds. Depending on implementation. In this case again, if I remember correctly, there was a case in which shamans do get bonus value out of two weapons having the same speed. Because of some Wind Fury proc interaction, I don't know. Google that if you're interested in enhancement. PvP. Difficult. It's not as bad as Paladins in my opinion, especially because you definitely can play around your Wind Fury totem with warriors in 2s or in Wind Fury comps in 3s, and especially because you are mandatory for 5-mans because of Bloodlust. They are probably solid midfield when it comes to a hierarchy in PvP arena. You can definitely hit Gladiator if you want to, but it's going to require some work from your end. Professions. If you're Enhancer, like I mentioned, go blacksmithing. If you're Resto, you can go tailoring for the same items the Paladins are going to, the Primal Mooncloth set, but otherwise just go leatherworking. Get drums, get set items. Especially there's multiple items that come into contention for enhancement. There's a really good set for elemental, to be honest. There's going to be a lot of stuff. Leatherworking is the when in doubt, leatherworking. Warlocks. Affliction got improved upon. Unstable Affliction is a great new tool for their kit. It's also the first go-to spec because it's better at lower gear levels than going Destruction, and has good raid utilities as well. You reduce the physical damage that is caused by the mob by 5%. You increase the Curse of Elements bonus damage by 3%. And that's also why basically you can always keep one Affliction. If you have that one guy who loves Affliction, he can play that forever if he wants to. Demonology. Honestly, not much to say about it. The Felguard is cool for leveling. That's pretty much it. Soul Link is in that tree, so you're going to spec that thing if you are going to be PvP, but nobody is going to play deep demo. Honestly. It's probably going to be to come handy when you have to tank something. There's 3 fights where Warlock might have to tank something in TBC. That's Leotheras the Blind, Illidan in his flight phase, and one of the adds on Kel'Thas. But other than that, whatever. Destruction. Are you hit capped? Are you over 1.1k shadow damage? Are you over 23% crit with talents? Or somewhere around those values? Then you can consider switching from Affliction to Destruction. And then you press that Shadow Bolt and never stop. Together with Seal of Corruption, which is pretty much the best AoE spell in TBC, you are the number 2 in TBC. When it comes to AoE, you are the number 1. You and Hunters are the best DPS that are going to be in your raid. Welcome to the big leagues. We even have a 50% aggro dump now on a 5-minute cooldown. So it's not Feign Death, but hey, it's something. You have unlimited mana like the Hunters pretty much. Warlocks and Hunters are their own league. Key items. Spell Hit. Really? You need Spell Hit, just like in Vanilla. Also, our friend Taylor Ing. That should be clear by now. PvP. Warlocks were already no pushover in Classic, and TBC allows them to go SLSL, which means Siphon Life and Soul Link. Therefore, you are pretty much broken in 1v1s. If you have a lot of time, get yourself a Druid and you can beat everyone 2v2, but it definitely won't be quick. If you add a Warrior to that comp, you also get a Mortal Strike, another sturdy boy with some mobility and constant bonking with mace stuns and stun herald procs. Congrats, here's your Gladiator title. Professions. No comment. The warrior. Not much changed for arms, honestly. You hit the thing with your big weapon, but you now have a debuff. Blood Frenzy, which increases the melee damage the boss takes by 4%, so you have actually a spot in a raid that you bring outside of maybe Battle Shout and just pure damage. You should still ask for Wind Fury though. The same goes for Fury. Fury though doesn't even have Blood Frenzy, so Fury is the spec that probably brings the least to a raid overall. Even less than Rogue, if you consider Exposed Armor. Exposed Armor is definitely bigger than simple Battle Shout, especially considering that the other specs can bring Battle Shout as well. Protection. You're early on the best tank because you have cooldowns, which Paladins and Druids sadly do not have for another expansion. And you also have anti-fear mechanics, and shield block is really OP early on because you just press it and you become uncrushable pretty much whatever you're wearing. You also get a new way of Thunder Armor with Devastate, and well, let's be honest, if you're going prod, you're going to be a tank, you always get a spot somewhere. The items. Weapons from blacksmithing. Whatever the spec, you should get weapons from blacksmithing. If you're arms, you probably should get the sword, the two-hand sword. If you are going to play PvP, it's going to be the Stun Herald. My personal trick would be to get the Stun Herald for Arena and get the one-hand maces and play Fury in PvE. That would be the way to get the most value out of it, I guess. Also, as mentioned already, the tank bracers from blacksmithing, because there is only shit for that slot otherwise. PvP. Mace go bonk. Bonk, 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 Stun Herald proc. Bonk, bonk, mace proc. We all know how it's going. Don't stop hitting and find yourself a druid. Congrats, here's your gladiator title. Professions. Your number one profession should probably be blacksmithing. If you are not blacksmithing and crafting yourself a weapon for tier 4 and tier 5, you are pretty much trolling in my opinion. So, pick blacksmithing and whatever. Those were the classes. We are going right into reputations. I pretty much categorized them into 3 because PowerPoint only comes in 3s. You have the useless category with all the stuff that gives mounts, pets and all that shit. Useless might be a bit polemic, but they are at least not relevant for what we're discussing here. Then there's the factions that give keys, some epics, head enchants, and recipes. Those are the ones we're going to talk about a bit. And there's the Shatrath factions. Because you pretty much need to be revert with all the factions that are in the middle keys category, I'm not gonna go over what they bring you outside of the exalted stuff if it's not something really outstanding, because, well, you're going to have to get revert with them anyway. Cenarian Expedition. Cenarian Expedition has the physical DPS head enchant, it has Earth Warden for the Feral Druids, it has a healing offhand and a caster ring. Honor Hold or Thramar, depending on your faction, have the healer head enchant, a tanking one hand, which is a sword for Alliance and an axe for Horde. Keep that in mind. So you can't get it, you can't use it as a paladin, for example. It has a caster sword and a ranged weapon, which is a gun for Alliance and a bow for Horde. That one is especially pretty solid for rogues and warriors. The Keepers of Time, they have the tank head enchant. They have some dagger that nobody's going to care about. They have a weird trinket that has a bit of stamina and resilience, which could be interesting for feral druids in the beginning, I guess. And healing braces. The Shatar have the caster head enchant, a tank shield, a healer mace, a strength and agility ring. And the lower city has a little bit of weird items. It has a caster mace, so for shadows and elemental shamans. It has an agility expertise ring. It has a strength hit polearm and also a very good trinket on revert already. A blue healing trinket with like I think 73 healing, the prayer book, which you can also wear twice I think if needed. That's the main consideration for Lower City. Then we have the big question, are we going to go Aldor or Scryers? That's not a big of a question, honestly, than it seems at the first look. It more depends on what you can use or if it even makes any difference at all. The Aldor shoulder enchants have more attack power, spell power, heal or dodge, while the Scryer enchants have more crit, spell crit, MP5 for defense. And other than that, it's very specific. The Aldor has an epic sword, so let's go rogues. They also have the healer spell threats for tailoring, while Scryers have a spell hit trinket on revert, which is pretty good. They have the caster spell threats for tailoring, and they have a caster ring. So pretty much, if you're a healer or a rogue, you should probably consider Aldor. If you're a caster, you should probably consider Scryer. Other than that, it doesn't make that much of a difference. There's also a few specific recipes. If you want some of those, look it up and choose for those. The difference is minimal. Then we're getting into professions. I have the 3 main professions on the first slide, I guess. Blacksmithing, we already mentioned multiple times. The weapons and the tank bracers. The weapons are, I cannot state enough how good they are, or can be, especially the two-hand weapons, because the tier 4 and tier 5 two-hand weapons are a big letdown. I mentioned Despair, the only two-hand sword in tier 4. Just craft yourself a two-hand weapon and be happy for 2 tiers of content without having to replace them. Also, the Stun Herald, if you are going to play Arena as a Retribution Paladin or a Warrior, should not be a question at all. You are going to get this item. Tailoring, if you're a caster or healer, caster in this case is casting overall, you should heavily consider going tailoring. The tailoring items are really, really, really good. They also have leg enchants. Leatherworking has some epics for most of the classes. They have different sets for different specs that can be honestly used by rogues, ferals, probably moonkins and resto druids, but those aren't that good. Hunters have multiple items they can choose from. Shamans, warriors probably as well, honestly. Really good items, and also leg enchants, and especially important later on, drums. You can chain drums. If you have 4 people, I think, in a group that are leather workers and have drums on them, you can constantly haste that group with drums. Drums, 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 drums. Channel your inner John Bonham and drum that shit. Engineering. Engineering will heavily depend on how we are getting TBC in the first place, because they are engineering goggles that got introduced later on during TBC. If they are going to be inside the game from the beginning, then they are going to be best in slot for pretty much everyone outside of maybe casters that can get spell strike hood. If they are going to be introduced later, they are going to have a lot less value. Engineering also has all the classic engineering stuff like teleporters, gadgets, bombs, none of which you can use in Arena. And most importantly for me, honestly, you have a specific way to collect motes from clouds around Outlands, which nobody else can. Engineering might become really, really good through that, as all the crafting we already discussed needs those primals, and those primals come from modes. So if you farm modes where nobody else can, might be really, really good. Jewel crafting is the new guy on the block. If you like playing the auction house like me, this might be your profession. Good for making gold if you invest the time. Buy raw and cheap, sell cut and expensive. There's also some trinkets you can craft, you can check those out. On this point, a word to actually jamming your items. Never just jam the colors your items offer you. You should go for what you need to activate your meta first and then for optimal stats. For most classes, that probably means you're going to be full red strength, agility, attack power, spell power, outside of the necessary ones for your meta. The guides you're going to Google will tell you what to jam other than that. Alchemy. Alchemy now has alchemy stones, which are trinkets, which could be useful also depending on how the implementation is going to turn out. Because the first version just has 50 of all stats. And the effect that your healing and mana potions get 40% more effect. In 2.4, there were upgraded versions of these stones which had spell power or attack power, stuff like that. So they were actually pretty good. This, as mentioned, is going to depend how they're going to be implemented. Other than that, you brew stuff, you transmute stuff, and you make money if you proc stuff. You specialize into pots, elixirs, which also includes flask in this case, or transmutes, and have a chance to get more out of your craft than you had the mats for. Especially the Primal Might transmute will gain you solid cash if you proc that with a transmute specialization. The others. Enchanting. Nothing really pretty much changed for enchanting. You enchant stuff. If you like standing in Orgrimmar screaming, I'm gonna enchant your shit, you can still do that. Nothing changed. Then you have the gathering professions. Mining. Nothing changed. Herbing. A bit changed. There's no Black Lotus anymore. There's now Fel Lotus, which you can just pick up from herbs. Just like arcane crystals are picked up simply through mining with a low chance right now. That's how Fel Lotus works in TBC. Then there's skinning. Skinning might be a solid choice because leatherworking is such a solid choice. So that kind of goes hand in hand. People will have a pretty high demand on skinning. Then there's the secondary professions, fishing, cooking, first aid. Nothing really changed. You can fish. Stuff that you can then cook. First aid gives you bandages. Same stuff. Leveling. This is also a thing that's going to heavily depend on how we are getting TBC implemented. Will we have a pre-patch where possibly people can already create Blood Elf Paladins and Shaman and Draenei Shamans? We don't know. Will everyone funnel through the Dark Portal at the same time? We don't know. Will there be layers? We don't know. But what we pretty much can say already is avoid being in the bulk. Do not be one of 10,000 people who try to kill Fel Orcs in front of Thralmar. That's not gonna be fun. You can prepare by having 25 quests prepared that you can turn in the moment TBC goes live. Ancient knowledge from when people raced for world first on new expansions tell stories of stuff like that. You also honestly have the possibility to go into the Plaguelands and just play there for 61, 62. Nothing goes against that, honestly. The probably best solution is going to be, though, to run dungeons. Dungeons, and dungeons. Because in a dungeon, all you have to worry about are the 4 fucking people that annoy you in your group, not the 4,000 outside of the instance. You are not going to compete for mobs. You will have a pretty much quiet run to 70 in the best case. And where this comes in handy is, as we mentioned before, the reputations. You're going to need revert for all the keys for the dungeons. Farming dungeons is the best way to get revert with those factions. So, if you run dungeons, you get the rep you need for heroics, you get gear, and you leave quests for later. That is going to be pretty good as well. Because when it comes to gold, making gold in TBC is a big field that opens all the possibilities for you. Honestly, the main thing is going to be the primals. As we already mentioned, all people who want to craft something are going to need primals. And there's only, I don't know the exact number, but I would guess no more than 100, maybe 200 mobs you can grind effectively for the good primals. So that should tell you something. If there's going to be hundreds of people farming for primals, while there's like 100, 200 mobs overall, good luck. Other than that, obviously, you can gather, you can mine, you can skin, you can herb. The same thing you could have always done. Then there's the cooldowns you can do. Like the tailoring has cooldowns to make the special cloths, which tailoring is really good. So those cooldowns are probably going to be really sought after. There's transmute cooldowns we already mentioned on alchemy for primal might especially. And depending on how the transition is going to turn out, if people can take all their money with them, I think selling services will be a good way of earning money. Like, as mentioned, I'm going to play a prot paladin. I think, together with a friend who's going to heal me, we could do solid money by selling runs for hard heroics in the beginning, for example, like Shattered Halls, or Karazhan Prequest runs for a specific amount of gold. I think that's a very, very nice option. And there's questing. That's what I was referring to on the dungeons on the last slide. You do get bonus gold if you do a quest while you're at the max level. I think the rate is 6 copper per XP point or something like that. Doesn't matter. But if you hit 70 without doing a single quest in Outlands, you can probably quest for 10,000 gold or something. It's free real estate. It's one of the best ways to actually earn money. Once you hit 70, go quest. Also, because you have to do the pre-quests for stuff. I'm not going to go into detail here because there are multiple guides around, and there's the legendary diagram how all the pre-quests interact with each other and how you get from whatever. This is the very, very, very basic model of that. To get into Black Temple, you have to kill the first boss in Hyjal. To get into Hyjal, you have to kill Kel'Thas and Vash. To enter tier 5 and tier 6, there are big quest chains to take you through heroics, and then a big chains, the Cipher of Damnation quest line in Shadowmoon, and it takes you into Karazhan, and you have to kill Gruul, you have to kill Magtheridon, you have to do the quest chain to summon Nightbane and all the stuff. To enter Karazhan in the first place, you have to do dungeons. To get gear, you have to do heroics. To get to heroics, you have to be revert. You get my drift. It's honestly a pretty amazing pyramid of pre-quests that all begin pretty much the moment you step into Outlands by having the reputation system to enter heroics in the first place. It's a very, very, very weird spiderweb that at the same time is very amazing to play through, to be honest, because it really goes step by step from the bottom to the top. A pyramid is a really good visualization of that. Key items in tier 4 overall are honestly going to be Dragonspine Trophy from Gruul, because every physical DPS will want that. It's pretty much TBC's DFT. Only in this time tanks won't want it, luckily. And that's the one item that's going to create drama if there's something. Other than that, there's the Talon of the Tempest or the Nathrazim Mindblade. That's 2 caster daggers. Talon of the Tempest is from a world boss, which is why I have it as an option, so to say, while the Nathrazim Mindblade is from the Prince in Karazhan. These are the best caster weapons in tier 4. Therefore, every caster DPS will want them. And outside of that, most items are honestly pretty well distributed. As long as you heed my advice and do not intend to get all your melee DPS weapons from the raids, because they mostly suck. Go blacksmithing. The third thing are primals. You remember all the crafting? Yeah. We have mentioned them many times at this point. Primals are very, very important. Raiding. The raids in TBC will be different than in Classic. There are no world buffs, there's no ridiculous consume stacking, there are only 25 people, there are 40 debuff slots. The personal responsibility goes up, and especially as a melee, you will have to work for your spot. As a hunter or warlock will be preferable to you outside of specific raid buffs. For melees, that means use your survival spells. Sprint or cloak out of a bad situation, bubble before you die, shamanistic rage when you know damage is incoming, intervene out of shit. TBC is going to try to fuck you over. There are cleaves, AoEs, stuff falling from the sky or ceiling, mobs bonking you in 1 or 2 hits if you pull aggro. The time of charging in fully world buffed and starting to blast are hopefully going to be over. If you die, you didn't even necessarily fuck up. The raids are going to try to fuck you up. Imagine getting tail swiped into fear into whelps, or knockback by a big tentacle into Mightseer from small eye tentacles on Sithun. TBC is constantly going to try to do that to you. On the Leothras the Blind first kill in retail TBC, Nihilum kicked all their melees, because it just made the fight easier. You'll only start to get rolling towards the end of tier 5 and really in tier 6. Before that, shining as a melee is completely on you. You can push into top 5 and survive all the fights, but that's on you outperforming your competition. Be reliable, prepared, and if you're a melee, be humble. Else you'll be seeing 6 minutes until release quite often. That is my overview in what you should know for WoW TBC Classic. If you liked that, press the like button, thumbs up. Write me a comment if you liked that, what you liked, or if you didn't like that, what didn't you like? Is there something I forgot? Something I maybe misrepresented? Tell me. If you really liked it, press the sub button. And as the slide says, this is the end. Bye bye.